Hi everyone, welcome to the October 29th edition of the TimeformUS forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and this week on the podcast we are going to look ahead to Saturday's Empire Showcase card at Belmont Park. Always a fun day at the end of the season in New York, the New York Breds getting to take center stage. Not as many stakes races as we sometimes see on this card because there are usually a couple of turf stakes in the mix. I know they had to postpone those until next week because there is plenty of rain in the forecast for this upcoming weekend in New York. So there's the strong prospect of a wet track, and we'll talk about some of the implications of that as we go through this sequence. And we are going to be talking about the late pick 5 sequence at Belmont Park on Saturday. It's races 6 through 10, including 4 of the stakes races on this card. It does end with a turf race at the end of the sequence. We'll talk about that for dirt as well, since I think there is a strong possibility that comes off the turf. And, Craig, I think this is the kind of sequence that if you're playing it, you can probably get away with doing it on a relatively small budget because there are some wide open races in there like the Empire Distaff, but some of the others I think you can narrow down quite a bit.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and I know we talked a little bit off air. I would most likely play a pick 4 because I'm not a big fan of this first leg we're about to talk about. I don't really see too many ways to generate any value, so most likely I would go with a pick 4. But I still think it's a good sequence of races and maybe some interesting vertical plays as well.
Yeah, I was saying to you, I kind of wish they had switched the 5th and the 6th races because of those 2 sprint stakes. I think the Hudson race 5 is much more interesting than race 6, which kicks off the pick 5 sequence. That is the Iroquois. Let's though begin with the late pick 5, and it does start with that 6th race, the Iroquois, going 6.5 furlongs for the fillies and mares on the dirt. And Craig, it does feel like we have 3 main players in this race, and the 2 drawn down towards the inside might have the edge because they do have early speed, both of them, the number 1, Miss Jimmy, and the number 2, the important one. The important one, though, I think is where the conversation has to start because she's just been in great form ever since they switched her back to dirt, and it feels like if she runs either of her last 2 races, she's going to be tough to run down.
Yeah, I prefer her of those 2 speed horses, and she's the horse I think is definitely the most likely winner in here. She has slightly better speed figures than the 1. She has slightly faster pace figures than the 1, and she also is drawn to the outside of the 1. So it just seems like, and I keep saying the 1, Miss Jimmy, for those who don't have PPs in front of them. So I think she's got a pretty big edge, so I would much prefer her over the 1 horse.
Yeah, I mean, this race just didn't come up all that tough. The important one is only coming out of a non-winners of 2 other than New York Bred Allowance race last time. She's actually won that condition twice in a row because she was offered up for the Tag 2 back when she won at Saratoga. So, I mean, this should be a step up in class, but as I said, this race just didn't come up that deep. So the speed figures that she's run in those last 2 allowance victories just make her pretty formidable in here. I mean, the thing that the number 1, Miss Jimmy, has going for her is that she does have that rail position. And if you were watching Belmont Park yesterday, as we recorded this on Friday, we did see some evidence of a rail bias. Maybe that'll change as the rain comes this weekend. We're supposed to get plenty of rain overnight, Friday into Saturday, so that sometimes can change the track profile. But we'll see how aggressively Dylan Davis decides to ride the number 1, Miss Jimmy, from the inside, because the pace projector does show her in front in the early going, and while she has a versatile running style taking into account her entire body of work, they've really been intent on using her early speed in her last couple of starts, including 2 back at Saratoga. So she could be a thorn in the side of the important one. And also, given the prospect of that wet track, Miss Jimmy has this amazing wet track record. You can look that up either in the career box in DRF Formulator, or if you click on the career record in TimeformUS PPs. She's never been out of the exacta in 10 starts on wet tracks with 7 victories. So she definitely moves up in this kind of going. But as you said, the important one is just run some faster speed figures.
Yeah, and I'm not dismissing Miss Jimmy. If I was going to play the pick 5, I think it would be silly not to use both of them. As for the others, I mean, I guess you have to give a look at a few of them. Espresso Shot is on the outside. For me, I'm not in love with her. I don't like the turn back in here. She's turning back pretty far, all the way to 6.5. She was running as far as 1.1 1/8, 2 starts back, so I don't really like her much in this spot. The real wild card for me was the 4 horse. Let Me Take This Call. I just don't know what to do with that last race. It was so bad, and I'd be willing to dismiss it just saying it was a sloppy track, because she had run some really nice speed figures before that layoff that would make her competitive in here. But as you say, the prospect of a sloppy track looms again on Saturday, so it's hard to use that excuse knowing that it could happen again.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with Let Me Take This Call. She had gotten so good last winter. She had just really turned into a sprint specialist that looked like she was on the cusp of winning races like this. They put her away for a while. Maybe that was out of necessity, and she didn't really take much money when she came back at Finger Lakes last time. For her to be 3-2 into the face of Miss Jimmy, who was 2-5 in that spot, given their relative speed figures coming into that race, I think that's a bad sign. And like you said, Let Me Take This Call just showed nothing over that sloppy track. So she's a little hard to take back here. I am very much interested, though, in the other horse you mentioned, Craig, the number 6 Espresso Shot. For me, I want no part of this horse going longer. I've never thought that she wanted to go 2 turns. She just doesn't really finish off those races. So I think going a mile and an eighth 2 back at Saratoga was really not her cup of tea. Also, we've talked about a little bit how that day was very speed favoring at Saratoga, so it worked against her. Last time out, she encountered a strong rail bias on opening weekend at Belmont Park. She was in the 2-3 path throughout that day, and I thought still made a nice move to get into contention in mid-stretch before kind of flattening out at the end. I love this horse turning back. I do think she's much better going shorter. I think the 1 turn 7 furlongs should be right up her alley. She's run competitive speed figures going this distance in the past, and I know some people might be somewhat bothered by her wet track record because she's run poorly in 2 prior muddy track starts this year, but I think she had other things working against her that day. There was no pace in the La Verdad when she tried a muddy track back in January, and then she just didn't get the most clever ride in the Critical Eye. It's another slow pace situation after that. So I think that she had different kind of scenarios working against her when she tried wet tracks in the past, and I think just based on pure ability, Espresso Shot is very much the equal of the important one, and I'm hoping that the top 2 at least apply enough pressure up front for this one to have a chance.
Yeah, I can say that. It is just 6.5. You said turn back to 7, which I would like more, but you've sold me. I kind of forgot about that real situation in her last start. So, I mean, I don't blame anyone looking for an alternative to the top 2, because as I said at the beginning, I just don't like this race much at all. I mean, we're still talking about a horse who's 3-1 on the morning line. So I'm not sure that's how I would want to start a pick 5.
Let's move on to race 7, where things get a little bit more open in the Maid of the Mist for the 2-year-old fillies going a mile. Many of these horses are stretching out for the first time, so you've got that component. A lot of these horses are also just coming out of maiden company, so they'll be stepping way up in class, and many of them are going to want to be forwardly placed on the stretch out, so you're going to have to see how the pace situation works itself out. And Craig, it's really hard to find the center of this race because you do have that situation where so many of these horses could be head and head for the early lead, and that is what the TimeformUS pace projector is showing, is we've got many horses forwardly placed in a fast-paced situation.
Yeah, it is, and I don't always trust the pace projector in these 2-year-old races because the horses are so lightly raced, but I do think things are going to get pretty hot up front, and I'm not in love with the favorites in here, to be honest. I mean, the one horse, Venny Valentine, she didn't do anything wrong first time out, and maybe the extra two furlongs is going to help her, but she only ran an 81 TimeformUS speed figure. I am a little worried she could get shuffled back pretty far from the rail. Maybe if things heat up, that's not a big deal, but it's just not a horse I'm in love with when I looked at the PPs. And the same goes for Sandy's Garden, who's the second choice. She won at Finger Lakes, won by 20 lengths, I mean, which just looks ridiculous. But then when you see the speed figure, it was only a 79. Now, she did run a much faster final time figure, a 92, but she went so slow early. And, I mean, who knows what the competition was at Finger Lakes, but it sure doesn't look like there was much in there. None of the horses have run back, at least as of today. Maybe there would be before tomorrow, but it was a pretty weak lot. She was 3-5 for a reason, so this is a race I would be looking to spread a bit and maybe just not use those two. They could beat me, but, you know, if they do, I'd be starting off a pick 4 with short prices anyway. So I looked in a little bit different direction, and one of the horses, which might surprise you as a speed figure guy, that I'm going to lean on is the 8-horse Captain's Daughter, and it's strictly because of that pace projector. She has the best TimeformUS late pace rating in the field, and she's the one horse as I scan through the ATPs that's actually run on dirt that I know will be coming at the end.
Yeah, I mean, she ran fine in that maiden victory last time. Obviously, she's going to have to improve a little bit to beat this field, but she does have that right kind of closing running style that you probably want in this race. I thought that last race, Captain's Daughter, coming out of it fell apart a little bit, but maybe she'll get the same situation here. I was a little bit more interested in some of those lightly raced runners. I'm not totally against Venti Valentine. She did close pretty well in her debut from way back. You don't often see a first-time starter run that way in a 12-horse field, making that big looping move. And she's actually a half-sister to Espresso Shot, who runs in the prior race. So she does have the pedigree to turn out to be a good one. Though I went in a slightly different direction. I'm not totally against that Finger Lake shipper, Craig, Sandy's Garden. I actually think that she ran really well in her debut, and I'd be willing to judge her more off that 92 final time rating than the 79 TimeformUS speed figure. I think sometimes in extreme situations like that, we knock down the TimeformUS speed figure maybe a little bit too much. I mean, she did run the final time that she ran, and I'm not sure how much against the competition she was facing she was really helped by going so slowly early, because she clearly could have gone faster. It's not like, there was anything behind her that was negatively affected by the slow pace. And also for a horse that's stretching out, I like when they show some finish, and she really did come home very nicely at the end of that race, obviously off some soft early fractions, but she's a daughter of Conveyance, a sire that doesn't get that many opportunities, but we've seen Conveyance produce some decent horses. I think Rudy Rodriguez has a stakes winner by Conveyance, Water White, who's gone longer. I think both of Conveyance's stakes winners that are his progeny have won stakes going route distances on the dirt, so I'm not that concerned about her stretching out in distance. She just has to maybe right off the pace or survive a slightly faster pace, but I believe this horse actually has some ability, so I would use her. And the other one that I want to focus on is the number 6, Sue Ellen Michigan, who from a speed figure standpoint, if she runs back to her debut, she's the fastest horse in this race. She got a 94 TimeformUS speed figure that day, winning in very decisive fashion, surviving a fast pace. She faced Echo Zulu last time in the Speedway. What chance did she really have in there? And if you watch that race, Jose Ortiz just basically gave up on her about a half mile into the race. He made just no attempt to motivate her for the final 3 furlongs. So, she was just basically eased in that spot. I wouldn't put too much stock into the margin of defeat that day. She's got some pedigree to stretch out, so I think she'll run a lot better here. So I'd be mostly trying to lean towards the 5 and the 6.
Yeah, I have no problem with Sue Ellen Michigan at all. It wouldn't shock me if she ran back. I mean, this is a major drop down in class. And yeah, Sandy's Garden, don't get me wrong, you brought up some points that I wanted to. I just think she's a bit of a wild card in here, but she's not going to be favored. But as you said, going slow and finishing, that is something I like to see when horses stretch out. So, I mean, I'm just not totally against her. I was just looking for just a little bit, definitely to get away from the favorite on the inside. But this race is a real puzzler for me, and I want to have a few prices on my ticket as well. That's why I landed on the 8. But definitely all the horses you mentioned. I will use the 1 horse. I'll use the 5. I'll use the 6. And that's probably about it. And the 8, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Velvet Sister is another one that you might want to throw in. I think that she's been just simply second best in her last couple of stakes tries at this level. But, she was beaten by a pretty good horse last time in Classic Edition. I'm not sure exactly where she is, because she would have been the heavy favorite in this race. I thought that she was going to run here, but I guess maybe they're moving her up into open company. I don't know. Maybe she's on the sidelines. She's not in here. But, I mean, she was clearly superior to Velvet Sister last time. But, she's run some decent speed figures, and I suppose that she could get in the mix somewhere. Just before we finish up this race, I guess my version of a bomb like Captain's Daughter in this race would be the number 3, Vallelujah, who has not run a competitive speed figure yet, but she only ran 1 time at Saratoga, had some trouble at the start, was actually finishing on decently at the end of that race. Again, she's another one that ran behind that talented horse Classy Edition in a race that I think came back a little bit slower than maybe the quality of that field might actually be. So I think she's one that could improve going the mile. Again, if I was making 1, 2, 3 picks, she would not be among them, but she might be the kind of long shot I'd throw in as a C in an ABC kind of wager for the pick 5.
Yeah, I actually gave her a good long look, and she's the kind of horse I would definitely use underneath in the vertical plays. The one red flag for me was she was 41-1 first time out. So, they didn't show a whole lot of respect for her that day, but she's going to be a huge price again. So I certainly wouldn't try to talk anybody out of using her, but I would have her on my tickets playing tries and supers for sure.
Let's move on to the middle leg of this pick 5 sequence. One of the more competitive races on this Saturday card, the Empire Distaff Handicap, going a mile and a 16th on the dirt. And we've got a really intriguing group of fillies and mares here, Craig. I know we talked about this one quite a bit in the stakes preview that we did that you can find on DRF's YouTube channel. We recorded that yesterday, and there are many ways to go in here. I really struggled in making the morning line in this race, not really knowing where the public would go because you've got horses coming in from so many different directions, different races, many coming off victories, many with winning streaks that they're trying to carry into this race. And one of those such runners is the number 10 Trini Luck, who's looking for her 4th in a row here. And I think it's interesting to start the conversation with her because we do have many runners that want to be forwardly placed in here. I think none more so than Trini Luck. And the pace projector does indicate that she could be fast enough to clear on the front end, but she'll have to do so from the far outside post position.
Yeah, she's going to have to clear quite a few. As you said early, there's definitely some horses to her inside with some speed. And like we talked about on the show, she's been a beneficiary of some pretty favorable tracks to her running style the last couple times. And maybe that's elevated her speed figures a little bit because her best before that was about a 102, and it suddenly jumped up to around the 110 range in both of the last two. So for me, she's a favorite I'm definitely going to try to beat in here.
Yeah, I mean, I always respect a horse that's in great form right now and doing well, and I was somewhat surprised that she did handle the distance last time, but as you said, she had things in her favor, the rail bias and the slow pace. She has been working extremely well coming into this race. If you watch some of her recent workouts on XBTV, you'll notice that she's been the work partner of Bella Sofia, Rudy Rodriguez's horse that is pointing towards that match with Gamine in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint, and arguably Trini Luck has been holding her own against that rival and arguably even once outworking Bella Sofia. So she clearly is doing well coming into this race. I'm just kind of committed to playing against horses that have had circumstances so much in their favor when they're unlikely to get that same scenario stepping up against tougher company. And a horse that I think is in a similar boat, Craig, is the number 7 Bank Sting. I know we were both kind of against her in this spot. She got a slow pace last time coming off a layoff. I think there are a lot of questions for her to answer. And I think you could even throw a horse like Maiden Beauty perhaps into a similar boat who got a very favorable setup when she won last time.
Yeah, both of them have won on the front end the last couple times, and though they're not committed front runners, looking at their entire past performances, they're not really horses who look to be, why would you change back after you win on the front end, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Now, we do see that happen in New York sometimes, but Bank Sting is coming out of shorter races, stretching out. So it's hard to imagine she wouldn't use her speed. And while I don't really consider her a contender, I do think she could be a thorn in the side of Trini Luck.
Horse that I think we both agree about here, Craig, is the number 1 Ice Princess. And as you go through this field, it does feel like there are a lot of arrows pointing in Ice Princess's direction. She's likely to get a decent pace setup. She's got that kind of versatile running style where she doesn't have to come from that far back. She'll probably be placed somewhere in mid-pack early, and it just seems like she's coming into this race in pretty good form.
Yeah, she's been a machine this year. She basically runs the same speed figure almost every time out. It doesn't matter if the track's fast or sloppy. If she runs on dirt or turf, she just keeps running those same kind of speed figures. 2 back, she won an allowance in the slop at Saratoga with a 109. Then she moved to turf in a race that I really liked where she got a 110. She's moving back for Danny Gargan, and she can come from off the pace, but it's not like she's a big closer. And she just seems like she's going to get an ideal trip. So of all the horses in here, she's the one I trust to run her race the most. I mean, I still think it's a really competitive race, but she's definitely one I'm going to rely on.
And it should be noted that Ice Princess is a horse that has shown a great affinity for a wet track in the past. She's never been out of the exacta in 5 starts on wet tracks, and she ran over a very sloppy track at Saratoga 2 back and seemed to really relish that, going with one of the best speed figures that she's put up on dirt in her career. So she definitely is one that should not be negatively affected by the conditions on Saturday. I wanted to go in a slightly different direction. While I do respect Ice Princess, I'm very intrigued by the number 4, Make Mischief, a 3-year-old stepping up to face older horses in here. She was in a really good form over the summer for Mark Casse when she was competitive in some graded stakes events. She was not disgraced at all, finishing 3rd in the Grade 1 Acorn behind Search Results and Obligatory, who at the time seemed like 2 of the top 3-year-old fillies in the country. I didn't think she even ran that badly, going the same distance over the same Belmont Park configuration in the Mother Goose when she was 4th, finishing just a length behind Clairiere. Always Carina, some good ones in there. Now, you could say maybe her form has gone sour since then, but I'm not really going to hold the test against her. That was an extremely tough spot, a legitimate Grade 1, where she was beaten by Bella Sophia, and she was just towards the back of the pack throughout. That was a race that was dominated towards the front end. And then last time out, she stretched out to a demanding 2-turn mile and an eighth at Saratoga, and she kind of blew the start, beat the gate a little bit, but had to steady after that, was wide every step of the way, got there at the stretch, but, was passed from the inside by Hubby Hello Money, who saved all the ground that day. And I thought Make Mischief was best in that spot. And coming back here, I think turning back to the 1 turn, there's a chance that she can get back to one of her better speed figures. And if she does, she's right on par with Ice Princess and all the other top contenders.
Yeah, particularly as I remember you noting yesterday, she had run around that 110 range way back in June. Even before that, she ran a 108 in April. So for a 3-year-old, if she can get back to those races, you would expect figures even higher than that in the low teens, which would make her a strong contender in here. She's definitely one I'm going to have on my tickets. The other one I'm going to use, and I know you're not as big a fan of, is the 3-horse Dancing Kiki. And I know too, back at Saratoga when she won that allowance race, she probably benefited from the track, but I also think she looks like a different horse in the Mike Maker barn. She has improved her speed figures even when she moved the turf, elevated it 9 points over what she had run. So I just think she's a she just looks like a new filly who's running a lot better for the new barn. So I don't want to leave her off my tickets at what should be a juicy price.
Yeah, I don't want to be too hard on her because she likely is going to be a decent price in here. I didn't see her getting the same front-running trip that she got to back when I did think she was on a speed-favoring track in that Saratoga do. I wasn't as enamored with her last turf race as you were, so I'm a little bit skeptical of her improvement for the new barn, but I mean, as I said, she's probably going to be somewhere in the 8 to 12 to 1 range in this race, so if you like her at that price, I'd hardly want to talk you off her. The other horses that I think would be somewhat interesting in this race would be the number 2, Sharp Star, who is another one who should be in that low double-digit odds range, and she's one that ran some speed figures at the end of last year that if she was still running them, she'd arguably be the favorite in this race because she was getting TimeformUS speed figures that were approaching 120 at one point in her career. But as you've noted, Craig, that was over the Aqueduct main track at, a time in the winter when sometimes you can see some aberrationally high speed figures. And she did go in the wrong direction after that. She's kind of struggled to get back into form during her 2021 season, but she got into prep last time going shorter. I do prefer her going longer distances. So she's one that I do think has a chance to step forward second off the layoff. And it feels like at this point, those gigantic speed figures from last winter are far enough down in her past performances that she's not going to really take any money off them.
Yeah, I would agree she's going to be a price. I'm not a fan because, like I said, as you noted, I don't like horses coming out of those Aqueduct races. They don't seem to back them up as often as they do at other tracks. But again, big price, so certainly can't knock you for trying her.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about the number 6, Mrs. Orb, and we were talking about this race yesterday or today. Not that she's a major player in this race, but I mean, she seems to always show up with a good effort in these New York bred stakes races. Maybe her form's gone a little bit south this year, but I mean, she's another one that would not be a big surprise in this race, especially if the pace heats up. She's got that similar running style to Ice Princess, and she's got plenty of back races that make her competitive. Not saying I necessarily like her. I didn't put her in my top 4, as neither did you, Craig, but she's just another horse in a very competitive race that I don't think would be a huge shock. Let's move on to the penultimate leg of this Pick 5 sequence. Race 9, the feature race at Belmont Park on this Empire Showcase Day card. It's the Empire Classic, going a mile and an eighth around the 1 turn on the dirt course at Belmont. And, Craig, we've got some older horses in this race, some proven class horses at this level, including the venerable Mr. Buff, who is seeking his third consecutive victory in this Empire Classic. But I think we agree on this one. They're all going to be hard-pressed to beat the upstart 3-year-old, the number 5 American Revolution, who just seems like he's gotten really good in the past couple months.
Yeah, much like the dirt races in the Breeders' Cup we've been talking about all year, we both kind of prefer the 3-year-olds in the vast majority of those races. It's hard to see American Revolution having much trouble with this field. I mean, some of the horses in here are real consistent, hard-knocking types, but we know what they are at this point, and they've never really been as fast as American Revolution already is, outside of Mr. Buff, who I'm sure we'll talk about in a little while, but he seems terribly off form. And American Revolution has just been on an absolute tear. He's improved his TimeformUS speed figure every single time he's run, starting with a 97 way back as a 2-year-old at Keeneland and moving all the way up to a 125 last time in the Pennsylvania Derby. And even though he was beaten 6 3/4 lengths that day, I mean, it was by Hot Rod Charlie and Midnight Bourbon are the 2 horses in front of him who were just right at the top of the 3-year-old class. And I actually like how he ran that day. It's not like he just kind of clunked up for that third beaten 6 lengths. He did it by being up close to what was a really fast pace set by Hot Rod Charlie. He was only 3 lengths back in a half mile with a pace figure of a 156, which is coded red in our past performances. So I just like everything about him. And for me, he's going to be a single in here.
Yeah, he's one that I would use very prominently in this. I would really lean on him heavily in this pick 5 sequence as the only A, maybe only with one other horse as a backup. I'll get to that other horse in a little bit, but we agree about American Revolution. Just seems like he's in great form right now. I mean, I guess the only minor question for him is the prospect of the wet track, because it's something he hasn't really faced in any of his winning streak this year. But I'm not that concerned about it, because in his 4 races this year, he's raced over 4 different surfaces: Belmont, Finger Lakes, Saratoga Parks, and he's run well over all of them. So is a wet track really going to bother him that much? I'm a little skeptical about that, and I just think he's a very likely winner of this race. And as for Mr. Buff, who, Craig, I'm a huge fan of, but it's just really hard to make a case for him in this race from a handicapping standpoint, because seems like these days he just finds any excuse not to show up. I mean, he encounters the smallest straw in his path and he'll just kind of throw in the towel. And, the prospect of a wet track, it really doesn't help him, because his last few starts over wet tracks have not been among his best. And I just wonder if he's got the speed to make the frontier, despite what the pace projector indicates.
Yeah, that was my problem with him. As we've talked about before, sometimes the pace projector takes a little while to catch up because we look at the last 5 races, but he just doesn't have the same early speed he did when he was terrorizing this New York bred division and just winning at short prices. And not only does he not seem to have the same early speed, he's a horse who just is throwing in the towel. I mean, he's been beaten by about 30 lengths combined in his last 2 races against horses that this time last year and the year before he would have toyed with. So he'll probably still take some money just on name recognition alone, and people like him. I mean, he's a tank of a horse. And I'm a big fan too, but yeah, I'm not going to use him on my tickets. And as far as the pace projector goes, for me, even though he's shown on front, I would actually think Seafoam is going to be the horse that's in front. We have him back and forth a little bit due to he's been in some slow pace races. Also, he ran that 1.5 mile race in the Goodwood Cup at Parks last time. But his 2 before that, he's pretty quick. And he set the lead against a lot of these same horses in the Evan Shipman at Saratoga. And I would guess they're going to send him to the front here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Seafoam is the one that is going to take it to Mr. Buff early and potentially even control the pace on the front end, because he seems like a horse that really does need the lead to run his best race, and I think the connections are very aware of that. You could see Joel Rosario was very intent on even hustling to the front end in that Greenwood Cup last time, despite the fact that it was a 1.5 mile race. He rode him really aggressively in the first quarter mile. So the connections seem very aware of the fact that Seafoam needs to be forward. And I don't think Seafoam is impossible to upset this race. If the track is still playing to inside speed as it was on Thursday, that might help Seafoam. But he's going to need some things working in his favor because American Revolution just seems like a better horse. The one horse that I would use as a backup at a bigger price is the number 6, Danny California. I know he's coming off a couple of disappointing performances, but I think you can make excuses for his last 2 races and 3 back. He ran a really nice 120 TimeformUS speed figure when he won going the same distance at Saratoga, showed good tactical speed that day, beat some legitimate horses in victory. They wheeled him back just 4 days later after that. He was racing over that speed favoring track when Seafoam wired the field, so I can excuse him for that. And then last time out at Saratoga, that was another race that was just dominated towards the front end. Those are arguably better horses. Thomas Shelby, Mystic Knight, you're to blame. That was a really tough optional claiming race, so I'm not going to really fault Danny California for, failing to muster a strong rally that day. I like him going this distance, and I think he's got a big shot to pick up some pieces here and maybe get in there at a big price if American Revolution doesn't show up, or some others like Mr. Buff and Seafoam don't get their ideal trips.
Yeah, he's the kind I talked to when I said earlier in the show I would play some verticals. I would definitely consider Danny California after hearing the arguments you've made. We talked about Thomas Shelby on the Pacecast. He came back to win at Keeneland with a big 120 pace or speed figure. So he's a horse who's definitely in just raging form right now. So I can give him a pass for those last 2.
Let's finish things up with the final leg of this Pick 5 sequence. It is the only turf race in this sequence, or I should say scheduled turf race, because it seems unlikely that this race will be able to be contested over the turf, given how much rain is predicted to fall this evening into tomorrow. But it is scheduled at 7 furlongs for New York bred allowance, nominators of one other than. Craig, if this race does stay on the turf, I feel like I don't have a strong opinion here. There are 4 horses that I've listed at single digits on the morning line. City Mischief, King Angelo, Neuro, and War Terminator. I can't say that I love any of them. I guess if I had to pick one, I would lean towards the upside of War Terminator, who's just making his 3rd career start, but he could also be the shortest price.
Yeah, he may be. The one I would actually lean to on turf is Neuro a little bit, just because I think he's been going a little bit too short. His best race has come at 7 furlongs, so I like to return to there. But I don't have any huge lean if it stays on the turf, but it would be Neuro for me as a top pick.
Yeah, and if this race comes off the turf, which seems pretty likely, there aren't really that many appealing or really any appealing MTOs in this race, so you're kind of left with the horses that were entered for turf, and I think there is one that has plenty of dirt ability, and that's the number 5, King Angelo. I'd even make the case that he might be slightly better on dirt than he is on turf. I don't know why his connections keep entering him on the turf, but if this race comes off, King Angelo looks like a pretty likely winner to me, Craig.
Yeah, I saw exactly the same thing as you did, and I actually, of the 4 you mentioned, if it stayed on turf, he's the one I like the least, because I would hate him at 7 furlongs. Not hate, but I wouldn't like him as much at 7 furlongs on the turf. He's had his best success at shorter distances, 5.5 at Saratoga, so he would be the one I was against at dirt, but on turf. But on dirt, he just seems like a standout to me, and it's hard for me to imagine I would have a very deep ticket in this leg with him keyed pretty prominently.
Yeah, I mean, the number 4 Bad Guy has run some decent dirt races in the past, but he's not exactly a winning type and not a horse that you can really trust to win 2 in a row after he won at Finger Lakes last time. And I guess the number 3 City Mischief ran some okay races at the fairgrounds last winter on dirt, but it does seem like he's more of a turf-inclined runner. So yeah, King Angelo just seems like he's found the right spot if this race gets rained off the turf. And, that would make it a slightly more playable sequence, Greg, if you're able to narrow down this last leg, because using 4 horses as opposed to using 1 horse will really trim down the cost of your ticket. And just to kind of review a little bit, if this is a sequence that you're even thinking about playing, where are the spots you'd emphasize and where are the spots that you would spread?
Well, I would definitely be very short in the last 2 legs, with American Revolution mostly a single, and if we go on the the dirt, then King Angelo would be a single. If it's on turf somehow, I would use those single digit horses not named King Angelo and leave him off. I think it was Neuro and War Terminator, and I forget who the other one was. Oh, City Mischief. But as far as the rest of the races, they're pretty wide open, and I'm definitely going to be looking to spread, particularly the Empire Distaff. I was gonna use Ice Princess, Dancing Kiki, Your Horse Make Mischief, and maybe Trini Luck just a little bit. She would be more like a C type to me, where the others would be A and B's, or B and C's. The seventh, A and B's. The seventh, I would definitely be spreading in there. I'm going to try to get a price in Captain's Daughter. I would use her pretty prominently, but I'd also use horses like Venti Valentine, Sandy's Garden, and Sue Ellen Michigan. The horse I didn't particularly like that you mentioned was Velvet Sister. I don't think I would use her very much. The six, I'm going to wait and see before I commit whether I'm going to play pick 4 or pick 5 in here. As I said, just not a big fan of that race. I don't really love any of the horses, but none of the alternatives that I think can win are going to be much of a price. So most likely I'm going to sit that one out.
Yeah, I just quickly threw together a ticket in DRF Ticketmaker, and if you play it for the minimum with that last race coming off the turf, it just comes out to a total of $21. So this is a pretty playable sequence for a small budget. I mean, the way that I put it together was I would emphasize Espresso Shop in that first leg of the Iroquois. I'd make her the A, and both of the speeds, Miss Jimmy and the important one is B's in that race, just trying to get a bit of a better price. In the seventh race, the Maid of the Mist, I would use Sandy's Garden and Sue Ellen Michigan as the 2 A's, the 1 and 7, Venti Valentine and Velvet Sister as B's, and the number 3, that big long shot Vallelujah, as a C. In the 8th race, I would make Mischief my only A. Ice Princess and Sharp Star would be B's for me, just trying to get a bit of a better price. And I would use a few horses as C's, Mrs. Orb, Buy Hubby Hello Money, and that speed, Trini Luck on the outside. I would let horses like Bank Sting and Maiden Beauty beat me. I'm just totally against them. I would leave them off my ticket completely. In the 9th, I would just use American Revolution as the A, Dandy California as the C. That's it. And then if the 10th is off the turf, again, similar situation, King Angelo the only A, and I would use the 3, 4, and 6 as C's in behind, because just in case, those off the turf races can be a little bit chaotic at times, and the 3, 4, and 6, even Neuro, they all have a little bit of dirt for them to suggest if King Angelo doesn't show up, they could be the ones that benefit. But, it does seem like a pretty logical sequence, Greg, and aside from those 7th and 8th races that seem a little bit more wide open, you can definitely pare it down a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And the one thing, I mean, if you really like some horses in the sequence, there's nothing that says you can't play a short ticket and hit the repeat button a time or two as well. If you're looking to take something out of it and you think it's not going to be a bonanza payoff, which I don't think either of us thinks here. So sometimes that's maybe the way to go. I'm more interested. I'm more a guy with experience doing that, playing pick 3s, not so much pick 4s and pick 5s, but sometimes the sequence looks that way. And I do think that some of these horses do offer some value. I mean, you can get value in pick 4s and pick 5s. They don't have to pay $5,000 to be value. You can get a very logical sequence with a couple horses that add value to the sequence and get a nice payout.
I think that's a really good point you make, because I said, if you play all of the tickets for the minimum using the ABC method, it's just $21, but that's not the way that you necessarily should play those ABC tickets. Like, for instance, my All A's ticket, when I put this together, is 1 horse by 2 by 1 by 1 by 1. So for 50 cents, that's just a $1 All A's ticket. So if you're playing that for a higher budget than $21, you might want to, maybe hit that ticket multiple times, perhaps even playing that ticket for maybe $5 as the base bet, and then your other tickets, maybe with the C horses, like using that horse Vallelujah in the second leg, maybe I would just play that ACAAA ticket for 50 cents or $1, because you do want to emphasize your stronger opinions, that All A's ticket or the A's with 1 B's ticket, much more prominently than you do those horses that you're just throwing in as C's or maybe using more B's in there, those lower rung tickets in the ABC method.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you should structure your bets to match your opinion. So the ABC does help with that somewhat, but I don't think it totally does everything. It's a little bit tougher with picks fives, and the more you spread, the tougher it's going to be to change those amounts. But when you play less horses and don't spread as much, you can tinker with the amounts quite a bit and make your bet match what you think is going to happen.
No, there's no formula that makes these perfect to play. You just kind of have to massage them to fit your opinions best and make sure that you're not winding up with too many combinations that are going to give you a negative ROI or too many favorites in there. That maybe that's just a sequence that you don't want to play. And perhaps for you, that is this kind of sequence because it does look like there is the potential for it to wind up somewhat chalky. Well, that's all the handicapping we're going to do for this week. We will be coming back with one podcast next week, Breeders' Cup week. Craig and I will also be recording some stakes previews that you can find on DRF's YouTube channel for some of the Breeders' Cup races. We'll try to also cover some of the other races in our Breeders' Cup handicapping podcast that we do. That'll probably come out next Thursday, the day before the 2-day Breeders' Cup starts on Friday. So look for that next week. But remember that you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast coming up next week.